They say marriage is a second chance to get it right. For me, it felt more like a high-stakes gamble. My first marriage had ended in a mess of broken promises and a custody battle over my daughter, Lisa. When I met David, I thought he was my fresh start, stable, kind, someone who would help me rebuild what I thought was lost forever. But I hadn't planned on Hannah. Hannah was David's daughter from his first marriage, a stunningly confident 18-year-old who carried herself like the world owed her something. She moved back into the house last summer after her freshman year at college, and since then, it has been a constant clash of wills between us. Tonight, my mother was visiting for dinner, and the tension was palpable. The dining room felt stifling, not just because of the summer heat but because of Hannah's sharp tongue and that perfect smirk she wore like armor. "So, Hannah," my mother started, ever the conversationalist, "what are your plans now that you're back home? Looking for a summer job, perhaps?" Hannah twirled a strand of her honey blonde hair and smiled sweetly, her eyes darting to David before she replied. "I think I'll just take some time to focus on myself. You know, self-care is important." My mother's eyebrows shot up slightly, but she said nothing. I knew what she was thinking. Self-care was just an excuse to avoid responsibility. David, predictably, jumped to her defense. "She's had a rough semester, Mom. I think a break might do her good." I bit the inside of my cheek, keeping myself from snapping. Lisa, sitting across the table, rolled her eyes and focused on her phone, clearly over the whole scene. As the conversation moved on, I couldn't help but notice how Hannah leaned into David's space when she spoke to him, the way her laugh lingered just a little too long at his jokes. I knew I was being paranoid, but something about it made my stomach churn. After dinner, as we cleared the table, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. "You're awfully quiet tonight," she said, her tone laced with concern. I busied myself rinsing a plate. "Just tired, that's all." Her hand landed lightly on my arm. "Is everything okay with David? You two seemed off." The question hit a nerve I didn't even realize was raw. I forced a smile. "We're fine, Mom." "Really?" But as I watched David and Hannah laugh together in the living room, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't fine at all. The first sign was subtle, almost too small to notice. But small things have a way of piling up until they're impossible to ignore. It started with the late nights. David, who was usually the first to suggest we go to bed together, began staying up longer. At first, he claimed he was catching up on work, but more often than not, I'd find him sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, or watching some mindless show. Hannah would be there too, tucked into the armchair with a blanket draped over her legs, sipping tea like they were two old friends. One night, I woke up around midnight and noticed David wasn't in bed. When I walked into the living room, there they were again, sitting together, whispering about something I couldn't quite hear. The moment I stepped into the room, they both went silent. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. David smiled too quickly. "Yeah, just talking about her classes." Hannah didn't say anything, but her gaze lingered on me, calm and unapologetic. The second sign came a week later. I was folding laundry when I noticed one of David's shirts was missing. It wasn't just any shirt, it was a shirt I bought him for our anniversary, a soft navy blue button-down he always wore to special occasions. I found it later, hanging in Hannah's closet. When I asked her about it, she shrugged. "I borrowed it. Dad said it was fine." I didn't argue, but the pit in my stomach grew heavier. By the time my mother suggested a family photo shoot, I was already on edge. "It'll be fun," she insisted, her voice full of forced cheer. "A way to bring everyone together." I couldn't say no. She had come all this way to spend time with us, and I didn't want to ruin her visit. We went to a small park near our house, the kind with a gazebo and a scenic pond that people used for wedding photos. My mother had hired a photographer, a sweet woman named Gina who had a knack for making people smile. But no amount of coaxing could make Hannah act like she wanted to be there. She showed up in a low-cut sundress, a little too casual for the occasion, and spent the first 10 minutes scrolling through her phone while Gina tried to set up the shots. "Can we just get this over with?" Hannah said, her voice dripping with impatience. "Hannah," David said gently, "this is important to your grandmother. Please." That word, "please," struck a nerve I couldn't explain. He used the same tone with her that he used with me when he was trying to calm me down, and it made my skin crawl. The photo shoot was a disaster. Lisa barely smiled, Hannah's attitude soured the mood, and David seemed oblivious to the tension. By the end, my mother looked more tired than happy. On the way home, she broke the silence. "You know, dear," she said, her voice low, "I think Hannah might be confused about her place in the family." "What do you mean?" I asked, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "She seems very attached to David," she said carefully. "More than I'd expect from a stepdaughter." I didn't respond, but my mother's words echoed in my mind long after she fell asleep that night. The unease followed me everywhere. At work, at home, even in the quiet moments when I tried to convince myself I was overthinking, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One morning, while David was at work and Hannah was out with friends, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I went through David's phone. I knew it was wrong, an invasion of privacy I would never be able to justify if I was caught. But the doubts gnawed at me, and I needed answers. I didn't find much at first. His texts with Hannah were innocuous, mostly reminders about errands or updates on her college applications. But then I opened his photo gallery. There it was. A picture of Hannah wearing that same navy blue button-down, her hair loose around her shoulders, and her expression one of carefree amusement. She was sitting on the couch, holding a mug, and the way she was looking at the camera made my breath catch. It wasn't the kind of look you gave your father. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. There was no context, no explanation, but the image confirmed every fear I'd been suppressing. When I confronted David about it later that night, he was dismissive. "It's just a picture," he said, his tone exasperated. "She wanted to borrow my shirt, and I thought she looked cute. That's all." "You thought she looked cute?" I snapped, my voice rising. "She's my daughter," he shot back, glaring at me. "What do you expect me to say?" The argument ended there, but the tension between us grew stronger. The next day, I took things a step further. If David wasn't going to admit what was happening, I would force the issue. I scoured Hannah's room when she wasn't home, looking for something, anything, to back up my suspicions. That's when I found the journal. Tucked under her mattress, it was one of those leather-bound notebooks teenagers use to spill their secrets. I flipped through it, my heart pounding as I read the entries. Most of it was harmless, notes about her classes, frustrations with her friends. But one passage stood out. "Sometimes I feel like David is the only one who understands me. He makes me feel special, like I'm worth something. I don't know what I'd do without him." It was vague, but in my mind, it was enough. I copied the page with my phone, determined to use it if I had to. That evening, I showed it to my mother. "Look at this," I said, handing her my phone. She read the screen, her lips pursing tightly. "This doesn't look good," she admitted. "But it's not concrete proof of anything inappropriate." "It's enough to make people think," I said, the edge in my voice unmistakable. That was all it took. My mother, with her flair for drama and her insatiable appetite for social media, crafted a post that night. She didn't name names, but the insinuations were clear. A young woman in our family was crossing boundaries, and it was causing a rift. Within hours, the post went viral. Comments flooded in, most of them supportive of my mother's bravery in speaking out. David and Hannah had no idea yet. But as I lay in bed that night, scrolling through the growing number of likes and shares, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. Finally, I had taken control of the situation. By morning, the post had become a wildfire. My mother's cryptic but damning words had struck a nerve, and people were eating it up. The comments were a mix of sympathy, outrage, and speculation. "Sounds like this girl needs to learn some respect. If this is true, that's beyond disgusting. You're so brave for speaking out. Families need to stick together." I sat in the kitchen, scrolling through the avalanche of reactions, a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. This wasn't how I imagined it would go. It was supposed to stay small, just a way to pressure David and Hannah into addressing what I felt was happening. But now the whole world seemed to be watching. The first cracks appeared at breakfast. David walked into the kitchen, holding his phone with a frown. "Have you seen this?" he asked, showing me the post. I feigned surprise. What is it? It's your mom, he said, his voice low. She's posted something alarming. Before I could respond, Hannah appeared in the doorway, her face pale. What the hell is this? She demanded, holding up her phone. Her voice cracked with panic as she read aloud. When someone in your family oversteps boundaries, it's time to speak up. Silence only enables the behavior. David looked at me sharply. Do you know what this is about? I don't, I lied, but my voice wavered just enough to give me away. Hannah's eyes narrowed. Bullshit, she spat. You've been weird with me for weeks. Did you tell her to post this? The room felt like it was closing in on me. I didn't tell her anything, I snapped. But maybe you should think about why she posted it. What the hell does that mean? She shot back, her voice rising. David stepped between us. Enough, he said firmly. We're not doing this here. But it was already too late. The fallout began immediately. That afternoon, Hannah's friends started texting her, asking if the post was about her. By evening, a few of them had unfollowed her on social media. David spent hours on the phone, trying to figure out how to contain the situation, but there was no stopping it. The next day, the accusations started. Strangers, emboldened by anonymity, began sending messages to Hannah's accounts. They called her names and accused her of things she hadn't done. She locked her profiles, but the damage was done. Meanwhile, David became distant. He barely spoke to me, his frustration simmering just beneath the surface. This isn't good for anyone, he said one night as we lay in bed, his back to me. It's hurting Hannah, and it's hurting us. Maybe if you'd addressed this sooner, it wouldn't have come to this, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He didn't respond, but I could feel the space between us widening. And yet, a part of me felt vindicated. For once, Hannah wasn't the golden girl. She wasn't untouchable. But as I watched her retreat into herself, her confidence crumbling under the weight of the scrutiny, I started to wonder if I'd gone too far. The silence in the house became unbearable. No more late-night chats between David and Hannah, no casual laughter from the living room. Instead, there was a strained, suffocating quiet that followed us all like a storm cloud. Hannah stayed in her room most days, only coming out for meals. When she did, her face was pale, her eyes rimmed red. She barely spoke to anyone, and even Lisa noticed the shift. What's her problem? Lisa asked one evening as we sat in the kitchen. She looks like she's seen a ghost. Just leave it alone, I muttered, but Lisa kept pressing. Seriously, Mom. Did something happen? Before I could answer, David walked in. He glanced at us, his face tight, and grabbed a beer from the fridge. Can you talk to your mother somewhere else? He said to Lisa, his tone clipped. Lisa shrugged and left, but the tension lingered. What's your problem now? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. David turned to me, his expression hard. My problem? My problem is that my daughter is being vilified by strangers because of something your mother posted. It's not like your hands are clean in all this, I shot back. Maybe if you weren't so. So what? He snapped, slamming the bottle onto the counter. Say it. Close to her, I said, my voice trembling. You act like she's your equal, not your daughter. It's not normal. David's jaw tightened. You're insane, he said flatly. Am I? I demanded. Because if nothing's going on, why does it look so wrong? He didn't answer, but the look on his face was enough to break something inside me. The next morning, I woke up to find that the situation had spiraled even further. A local news site had picked up my mother's post, turning it into a sensational story. Stepdaughter accused of crossing boundaries, a family torn apart. David was furious. Do you see what this is doing? He yelled, shoveling the article in my face. They're digging into her life, our life, because of your paranoia. It's not paranoia. I shouted back. You don't see the way she looks at you, the way She's a kid, he roared. She's my daughter, and you've made her a target for your insecurities. Before I could respond, Hannah appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. I'm leaving, she said quietly. What? David and I said in unison. I can't stay here, she continued, her voice breaking. Not after this. David moved toward her, his hands outstretched. Hannah, don't. She stepped back, shaking her head. This house doesn't feel like home anymore. I opened my mouth to speak, but the look she gave me stopped me cold. This is your fault, she said, her voice sharp and full of venom. You wanted me gone, right? Well, congratulations. Hannah packed her things that afternoon. David helped her, the two of them exchanging quiet words I couldn't hear. I stood in the hallway, frozen, as she walked past me with her suitcase. She didn't say goodbye. When David came back inside, he didn't look at me. I hope you're happy, he said, his voice hollow. I wanted to tell him I wasn't. I wanted to tell him I never meant for things to go this far. But the words wouldn't come. The house felt emptier after Hannah left. Lisa tried to act like nothing had changed, but I could see her confusion in the way she lingered near the living room, waiting for Hannah to come back. David was barely home, throwing himself into work or spending long hours out, avoiding me entirely. For the first time, I felt the weight of what I'd done. It wasn't just the lies or the manipulation, it was the realization that I had torn apart the fragile connections that held this family together. And for what? A suspicion I could never prove, a jealousy I couldn't control. One evening, I decided to confront David. I waited for him in the kitchen, a glass of wine in my hand, rehearsing what I wanted to say. When he walked in, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion, I blurted it out before I lost my nerve. I made a mistake. David froze, his eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? I took a deep breath. I told my mom things that weren't true. About Hannah. I didn't mean for it to get this far, but it did, he interrupted, his voice cold. It got far enough to drive my daughter out of her own home. I was scared, I said, my voice trembling. I thought. You thought what? He snapped, slamming his hands onto the counter. That she was after me? That I would ever. What kind of person do you think I am? I couldn't meet his eyes. I don't know, I whispered. I just felt like I was losing you. David laughed bitterly. Well, congratulations. You've lost me now. For the next week, David slept on the couch. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was only about practical matters, bills, schedules, the house. Lisa noticed, of course, but she didn't ask questions. Then, one morning, I woke up to find his side of the closet empty. His toothbrush was gone, and his favorite coffee mug was missing from the shelf. There was no note, no explanation. Just an emptiness that mirrored the one inside me. Months passed. My mother stopped asking about David, sensing the guilt I carried. Lisa grew distant, spending more time at friends' houses than at home. And Hannah? She never came back. Every now and then, I'd see her on social media, smiling in photos with new friends, or posting about her college classes. She seemed happy, thriving even. But I wasn't part of that life anymore. David filed for divorce quietly, without drama or fanfare. I signed the papers without contest, knowing I had no right to fight for something I had destroyed. The last time I saw him was at a coffee shop near Lisa's school. He was sitting by the window, talking to someone I didn't recognize, a woman with dark hair and an easy laugh. For a moment, I considered walking in, saying hello, and trying to bridge the gap. But as I watched him smile at the woman, something inside me stopped. This was the life I had chosen, the consequence of my own actions. I turned and walked away, leaving behind the man I once thought would be my second chance. The house is quiet now, emptier than it's ever been. Sometimes I catch myself scrolling through old photos, looking at the faces of the family I had, the family I lost. And every time, I ask myself the same question, was it worth it? The answer is always no.